All right, and welcome in for another edition of SEC Football and Beyond. I'm Dan Matthews. He's Chris Landry. We join you twice a week on Tuesdays and on Friday mornings. We appreciate the time that everybody spends with us, reminding you as well, SEC Football and Beyond is available to you when you subscribe to the Landry Football Podcast channel on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts at. As Chris, a lot happening here as later today on this Friday, there is going to be almost every single SEC school, almost every single major college program is going to be holding their first fall camp practice. This is what we wait for.
Absolutely. It's that time. The week 0 teams are practicing, and some others are already gone. I know Ohio State and Tennessee in the league. You're right. Everybody's either practicing or reporting by this weekend, and we certainly have a lot of fun kind of breaking it down a little bit. So I think it's a fun time of year, and everyone's going to say, who's going to be the starter with this, whatever. And then we just hope that the inevitable, the thing I hold my breath is the injuries. I just hope none of them are real serious. But then you get some stories, like out at UCLA, that Dorian Thompson-Robinson was conspicuously absent. We had something on LandryFootball.com about it. I don't know if there's anything there. It's just no injuries, no nothing. Just don't know if anything's there. They got their first game against Hawaii in week 0 before they play LSU the week after that. So we'll be following all of that. It's a fun time of year.
And for those of you watching us live on Twitch right now, I apologize for not being able to have my face on there today. Some technical difficulties with the camera. So if you want to see what I look like, if you never have before, I really don't know why you would want to do that. But, of course, you can follow me on Instagram at Dan Matthews27. That's the way that you can do that. That's 1T in Matthews. But anyway, let's get into some of the storylines that are in and around the SEC. By the way, today, Chris, 14 current members of the SEC. Of course, 2 more coming up when, I guess we'll find out when exactly officially that happens. But for right now, they say, and I think, Chris, I don't think we're far off in saying in air quotes 2025, because I don't think there's a single one of us that believe that that's going to be the case. But long story short, we're going to break down OU and Texas. And I think we're going to take people on a little bit of an interesting journey through this, Chris, because it's what do the programs have and what do they need in order to be successful or at least compete in their new conference that they're going to be joining here in short order?
Yeah, it's it's time to start looking at it. As you kind of alluded to, a lot of us think that they're going to be playing in this league next year. We'll let the lawyers deal with that, and it's going to be soon. And I do think, Dan, that a lot of folks are going to be paying a whole lot of attention to Texas and Oklahoma. I'm talking about SEC folks, about how they're doing, more than they normally do, and because how they're going to fit in. And this year's, certainly the Texas-Arkansas game was going to be a big one anyway. Historically, it is.
Right.
It's kind of scheduled to be one. I think that you're going to be more interested in that. But even like when it's Oklahoma playing, whomever, certainly Oklahoma, Texas, but the people are going to say, well, see how that plays up. Well, they're really good. It might be a fact. So and if Oklahoma is able to make the playoffs, for example, I think people are going to be looking at that in the SEC. So what we thought we'd do, since for those of you that are new to this show, A, where have you been? B, we've gone through the entire league. We've broken down every team in the league in detailed scouting report form. So we thought, hey, look, we take some time and do the same thing with Texas and Oklahoma, as if there are teams. And by the way, I think what we may do, we may do a couple of maybe the national teams, because we've got all the SEC teams. We've got Oklahoma. We may do like Clemson and Ohio State, next week, whatever, just some elite teams. But look, it's time to start thinking in terms of Oklahoma and Texas as part of the SEC, because they are soon going to be here.
Yeah, and it's also, too, if nothing else, we've got to live up to the beyond portion of what the show is as well. So we've got a little bit of potential, but then also, too, for right now, yes, the beyond, because they still are in that 10-team league that is currently known as the Big 12. As we know in college sports math with the conferences, who knows? All right, let's get into some of the storylines, Chris. Breaking earlier on Thursday, Greg Sankey, his contract extension with the league, going to keep him the commissioner of the SEC through 2026. Nobody expected him to be going anywhere, but also, too, I think that there's been a resounding response on Twitter of everybody saying that is well deserved. Look at what he just pulled off.
Yeah, I think it was interesting. I'm sure this was planned to kind of come out the end of the week anyway, but it came the day after Washington State's president basically accused the SEC and kind of almost accused him of being like an axe murderer or something. And that's just kind of a way to say, hey,
predatory.
Yeah, a predatory conference. And so it's kind of the way the Pac-12 president said, well, we'll show you what we think of them. We're pretty pleased with how we're doing things here. He's done a really good job. He had some big shoes to fill. Look, it's an unusual time because Jim Delaney retired. Obviously you've had changes in the Pac-12. You've had changes, long-time commissioner of the ACC gone. And so now he's like the big guy now. I mean, the Big Ten, that Kevin Warren has just taken a beating and got, as I mentioned, a guy who hadn't unpacked his boxes yet in the Pac-12, Jim Phillips in the ACC. So you got in Greg Sankey the most powerful guy, dare I say, in college athletics. Because with the NCAA in the status that it's in, with Congress basically saying you're out of business, and with the conference maybe taking over, he's the most powerful guy in college athletics, I think. So it's just certainly a stamp of of just that this is kind of where we are, and we're really happy with him. We're going forward.
And, I got to say, Chris, over the last couple of years, his batting average in my mind, and I think in many people's eyes, has been very good. Where look at how he handled COVID-19 last year when we were in a much worse situation. No vaccine, no anything like that. And it seemed like throng, or if nothing else, the vocal minority. However you want to look at it. Oh, we can't play. It's too dangerous. There's no way. We're going to have players dying on the field. It was Greg Sankey who was standing up and saying, just wait. Let's wait. Let's get more data. Let's make an informed decision, and then we'll go from there. And then quickly, you had the Pac-12 and the Big Ten looking at the SEC saying, oh, boy, we really screwed this one up. I mean, we could have done what they did and been just fine right now, and starting in late September, early October, and being able to have a season as best we could.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about it. And, I just got done prior to, this show on the Twitch channel doing the Pac-12 show. And one of the things I talked about was kind of where the Pac-12 is, the Big 12 is, in relation to the SEC. Well, look, I get it. And right now the SEC's getting hammered and the ESPN's getting hammered. This is monopoly and it's predatory, all these terms. And I would just say this, and I'm not necessarily one that thinks that everything that's happened is the best for the overall college football. However, what I think is important is I look at it in this terms. The SEC is doing it best. They're doing it best on the field. They're doing it best off the field. Everybody pick up your game. I mean, I look at the Pac-12. And I went over 4 teams. There's some good teams. There's some good players. There's some outstanding coaches. There's been bad leadership. And I get it. But if you're going to live in we got 32 sports and we're the Conference of Champions because we have the best water polo programs. If you're going to live in that world, this is where you're going to be. Get your act together. I'm one of 12 people that can actually watch the Pac-12. Well, it's the Pac-12 networks. I explained this to somebody on a podcast yesterday, Dan. I don't know if you've seen the Pac. I got to ask because most people haven't seen it. It's not a Pac-12 network. It's networks. They've got 6 of them, and it's by region. So in other words, it's Pac-12 Los Angeles. It's Pac-12 Northwest. It's Pac-12 Washington. Pac-12 Arizona. Pac-12 Mountain Region, Colorado, Utah, so on and so forth. Nobody can see that. I think that what these other conferences need to do, and I think the Big Ten does a good job, I think the ACC does a good job, but they've got to do a better job. And with television market, I think television rights, I think certainly the ACC's in pretty good position with their ties to ESPN. I think the Big Ten's done a good job with Fox. Pac-12's got to pick it up. They've got to find some television alliances. They're in a tougher spot in terms of their games, because if they put games in prime time where everybody else can see it, if they play like an early slot, well then over there they got to go to 9 o'clock in the morning games. If they go put their games when it's convenient for their fans, it's too late. A lot of people around the rest of the country are sleeping. So they got a problem that no one else has.
What if you could get it with fire roast?
But one of the things that I think are an issue is just they're poorly administrated. So look at what the SEC is doing. Learn from it. And instead of, hey, oh, they're too good. Oh, they can, try to up your game, because I am, for one, somebody that loves college football as a whole, and I think it's better when you've got all parts of the country working. And right now, it's just becoming a SEC and everybody else. Good or bad, that's the way it is, but that's because the SEC is doing what they need to do and others are not.
All right, two parts before we move on to the next subject we have here on the news and notes of the SEC is, number one, Chris, the quiet part that needs to be said out loud here, you need Los Angeles to be good. You need USC and UCLA to pick their game up. What bottom line, I mean, I know that, you've had Andy Enfield doing a great job with the basketball program there at USC, but let's be honest, what drives the bus in South Central Los Angeles? It's when the Coliseum is rocking, and it's when you've got Snoop Dogg and Will Ferrell and everybody on the sidelines there wanting to be a part of it. I mean, I want USC to be hated again. Remember how that was in the mid-2000s and late 2000s when it was Pete Carroll there, and you had Brian Cushing and Ray Malaluga and Mark Sanchez and Matt Leinart and all of those players that everybody around the country hated. I was in Texas at the time. Even before that Rose Bowl, it was, God, I hate USC because they're getting all of the accolades and they're getting all of the pub, and people are just sleeping on University of Texas and everybody else. But I'll say this, they went out, they were fun, and they won. So you either loved them or you hated them, and that's what the sport needs. The other part of it as well is enter George Kliavkoff, because that's why he's there now. Let's be honest. He's there because he knows the entertainment industry. He knows the television industry and how to be able to mold those relationships together. And remember, too, one of the top coaches in his own league, when he got hired, David Shaw, said, well, to be honest with you, I hope we're just competitive, because that's the deal. We need to, in so many words, we need to be able to do what they're doing in Athens, Georgia, and what they're doing in Clemson, South Carolina, Tuscaloosa, Alabama, all of these other places, even at Ohio State and Columbus, Ohio, where they've got the facilities. They've got the indoor practice area. They've got the improvements to the stadium. They're showing their recruits and their players and their alumni, we care.
Yeah, and one of the things, and I don't know how George is going to do, it's too early to tell, but one of the things I was impressed with, I'm assuming he's during that process right now, he said that he was going to go and visit every campus in the conference and look at their facilities and to get a better sense of where everybody is. Mm-hmm. And so that's step one. Facilities are starting to get better, but they're still 20 years behind the South. And look, it is more important. It just means more is really true. It does mean more in the South, and it has to mean more. It has to start there. So there has to be the motivation. There's a lot of people out west. Maybe it's a little bit tougher to find those passionate college football fans. So they got to work a little bit harder to find them. But you got to do that, or else you're going to go by the wayside. You mentioned USC. There's no doubt about that. I love Clay. I think that job's too big for him. Mm. That job, and I mentioned this in the Pac-12 show last hour, that job will be fixed in 5 minutes with the right coach. With the right coach, because that should be everything that Ohio State does in the Big Ten. That's USC in the Pac-12. If you're doing it right, I mean, John Cooper, had success, but it wasn't. This is just not getting it done, and it's not even the right type of identity with USC. But they've got everything. The school that's doing it really well is Mario Cristobal out at Oregon. Kyle Whittingham does a phenomenal job. We broke the Utah team down. We broke USC down and Oregon down and Washington. There's some good things happening. You just don't know a lot of in the Pac-12. They just don't know about them. So in the end, the message to bring it back to the SEC is just look, the SEC's doing it better. Mm-hmm. And it's not just we're just better because they have done it better. Now go out and get it done. Get it better. Do a better job. emphasize it more, get more from. You've got to be creative, and I think you've got to do that. So I hope George Gleichoff does a good job of assessing the situation and getting them to where they're competitive. I don't think this whole talk about them merging. I don't. There's no. They're in still good. I mean, they're in better shape. The Big 12 is dying. The Pac-12 is, trying to figure what their next move is. The Big 12 is trying to find a next move so that there is a next move for them. I think they need to be strategic with the partners, with scheduling and TV. That's their next step. And for goodness, get the Pac-12 network where some people can see it and where they can create an identity to where people actually know what they're doing. I think that's a big part of it. I think that's a big part of the growth of the SEC too, and taking it to the next level. And I think it's helped the ACC some. I think it's helped the Big Ten some. Those networks matter. I think they really do, because it puts it in the hands of the fans to let them know a little bit more about what's going on at the big-time programs.
Let's get to Myles Brennan here in just a second, but just to put a bow on what you've been talking about right there, SEC-wise, Najee Harris, the Oakland Bay Area, going to Alabama. Bryce Young, Alabama. Eli Ricks, LSU. I mean, you've had Georgia being able to come in there and get
DJ Ungalele.
Yeah.
or DJ left LA, as they call them. That's what they call them out west.
And a handful of other players that have gone to Clemson from the West Coast. So
and then you get the Kayvon Thibodeau's that, hey, we'll go right there. Do you realize, I mentioned this, you realize that Oregon has 30 players on their roster that are 70 miles from the Rose Bowl, inner city LA area.
Yeah.
30 of them.
That goes back to Mike Bellotti. I mean,
but that also goes to what you mentioned about USC not getting it right. That should never happen. USC should always own LA. And I won't, because, hey, folks, if you want to know bigger detail, you can go back and listen to the Pac-12 podcast. But it's something that they've lost, and you've got to earn that back. Look, Alabama's had troubles in the past. I mean, Texas, we know, is not achieving it. A lot of programs have struggled, and USC struggled a long time before Pete Carroll got in.
Oh, yeah.
There are gaps. Just because you have the resources just doesn't guarantee you that you're going to get it done. They got to fix it. They do. Hey, look, and speaking of Najee Harris, folks will be able to see him in the NFL right now. You're right, going right to Alabama.
All right, so let's move on to the Myles Brennan story. We now have confirmation from his own father, Owen Brennan, what exactly happened. People, of course, earlier in the week, Chris, when me and you were recording this podcast, we found out about the injury, didn't have a lot of details at the time. Well, his father, Owen, going on WWL in New Orleans' Sports Talk with Christian Garrick, Bobby Hebert, and Mike Detillier. And according to Owen, the LSU quarterback had fishing gear in his hands when he was walking down a dock, and one of his flip-flops got caught in one of, I guess, the slats right there on the dock. It caused him to fall. He was unable to brace himself, and Owen Brennan relayed that Myles went to bed thinking it was just a bruise before doctors confirmed, nope, it was a compound fracture of the humerus bone in his left arm. I'm not an orthopedic surgeon. Obviously, I speak into a microphone. I'm not going to act like I know anything. But when I hear compound fracture, I'm not even thinking that that's a bruise.
No, it's normally when dealing with trainers and doctors and injuries as I have over the years, you just normally that got to let the swelling go down to really kind of know what's in there, because sometimes it just, I guess, clouds the picture for them. I know in talking with Jake Dietz there Monday morning when they said told me it was a fishing accident. I guess I kind of thought it was maybe a boat, but I didn't know that it was serious. And as you mentioned, we got in and we did a show. I didn't think much of it, and then it was obviously really bad, and it ended up being a lot worse. I feel bad because he worked hard to get back, and I don't want to predict whether he can come back or not. Again, as you said, not a doctor, and neither am I. Just wish him the best. I don't know. I think there's maybe a good chance he doesn't play at LSU anymore. I think there's a good chance he doesn't get back this year, and maybe he's got to have some decisions that he needs to make personally. But, yeah, tough. And, certainly the first thing that goes to my mind, other than feeling for him, is the coaching, thing clicks in with me is, your backup quarterback, and you're one play away from that guy being your starter, and I'm sure we'll get into it as to what that situation looks like, and how you need to get your backup enough reps to where he can lead your team if he has to, because that inevitably happens. It's in many cases in football, as we know.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I mean, especially too. I mean, a guy who has gone through really the hurdles that he has at LSU in terms of trying to become the starting quarterback there, where he had to wait his turn. And then, initially you thought, all right, he's going to be the guy that beats out this Ohio State transfer named Joe Burrow. And that didn't happen. He sits behind Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow becomes who he is. Last year, he finally gets his opportunity, plays really well. Unfortunately, the rest of the team, well, namely the defense, was not playing very well. And I think that some people unfairly, Chris, put that on Miles Brennan's shoulders, which, again, not fair to him because he played incredibly well in the 3 games that he had an opportunity to. And oh, by the way, I said it earlier in the week, I think that he won the team over by the news coming out. Hey, this guy played the entire second half or most of the game against Missouri with a really bad abdominal injury that most people would have said, yep, that's it. I'm out. I can't throw. I can't do any of these things. He toughed it out and played, and it's one of those things. There's certain guys that when you hear news like this, it makes you hurt even worse for them.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And I think, it's certainly in checking with the coaches there that, it certainly bothers the team when you have a guy like that. They feel bad for, a family member, a teammate. And yet, it happens before they start practice. They report on Friday. So, it's tough. And it's tough. It's tough to move on, but it's what you have to do, unfortunately.
Yes, it is, for sure. All right, one more before we get into our breakdowns of Texas and Oklahoma. Shane Beamer says that Kevin Harris not yet cleared for practice after a recent procedure. The running back for the South Carolina Gamecocks, leading all running backs last year in the SEC in average yards per game with 113.8. He is going to be entering into fall camp this year, recovering from a procedure on his back, that according to what Shane Beamer told reporters on Thursday.
Yeah, he's, I think, one of the premier backs in the league. I think certainly going to be tough sledding there. I don't know the numbers, how they'll be, and I anticipate them being behind a lot. So I don't know how many second half yardage he gets. A play up front's going to be part of it. In short, team's not very good around him, but he's a very good back. And I'd put him in that category of, you're talking about the best backs in the league, and you could throw him in there with the top 2 or 3. And I don't know that by the end of the year he'll get those type of votes for the reasons that I mentioned. But he's really, really good, and I think he'll be fine, and hopefully gets cleared soon, because I know that they want to get him ready and get him up to speed so that he can. They're going to rely on him a lot. I mean, in order to be able to throw the football, have some success, they've got to be able to run the football, and they've got to be able to get people to honor the run game.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. All right, so those are the news and notes from around the SEC. We're going to get into the National College Football and NFL version a little bit later on. For those of you watching us live right now as we record this Friday morning edition of SEC Football and Beyond, again, Dan Matthews, Chris Landry with you. If you're watching us on Twitch, don't be afraid to jump into the comments, because guess what we do at the end of the show? A little thing called the mailbag. Doesn't everybody like getting good pieces of mail? So that's what we can hopefully deliver to you. That is, of course, if you mail them. If you send them in right here, hit the comments section there on Twitch and hit us up with some of your questions. Chris, I'm assuming, it's one of those things. I'm not the brightest bulb on the tree in terms of everything in life. I mean, math is really a struggle for me. But one thing I did pretty well at was knowing the alphabet from A to Z. So I know that O comes before T. So are we going to break down the Oklahoma Sooners first and then get to Texas?
Sure, why not? Whatever. I think we can go in either order. I guess we put, it's always the Oklahoma, Texas, Texas, Oklahoma. It's kind of like you're familiar with it. Is it Georgia, Florida game or Florida, Georgia game? I mean, I don't know.
It depends on, and that's a really quick story here before we get into the breakdown. When I first moved to Georgia and I was working for a radio station in Atlanta, I had done an update and I said the Florida, Georgia game. Chris, you would have thought I burned the station down.
Where the hell are you, boy?
I was immediately let known. They learned me something, as we say. They learned me something that day where they said, up north of the state line of Florida, it's the Georgia-Florida game. I guess we give it to them down in Florida if they want to call it the Florida-Georgia game, but at least it's one of those. Yeah, and if you notice, too, on the side of the stadium there in Jacksonville,
yeah,
I have one display that says Georgia on top, Florida on the bottom, and then the next pane is Florida, Georgia, and it goes all the way around the stadium. So, of course, the Jaguars make sure that they have their bases covered there down in Jacksonville as well for that game.
No doubt. Well, I think it's only fair that Oklahoma has earned the right, through the alphabet, but it's also earned the right on the field. I think that they're legitimate, as we discussed, we'll talk about legitimate national championship contenders. That doesn't apply to Texas, but it does apply to Oklahoma. So I think that's a good place to start. One of the things when I look at the program, things jump out at me. It's a top 10 recruiting program, and it's also a top 5 transfer portal program. They were doing the transfer portal thing before the transfer portal thing was a real transfer portal thing. I mean, they were getting guys in, particularly quarterback, to help their team and to use that free agency process, as I like to call it, to their advantage. They do look what they did. They've got a couple of key guys that are going to help their team this year off of that. So they get it. They really do a good job with personnel. They are Clemson-like in their own conference. They've won 6 straight conference titles. I think there's that much of a gap. I get it. You play poorly. Spencer Rattler turned the football over. You lose to Kansas State. Okay, Clemson's had some of their issues in the past. It's very much a lot like it. The defense is what separates them from a Clemson. Clemson has been really talented on defense and has been really good, and they've been good on offense, have had good quarterback plays, all things that Oklahoma has on the offensive side. But Clemson has been able to put it all together to the tune of 2 championships, and that's the reason why. I think the defensive coaching and the personnel has gotten better as they're getting faster so they can blitz more effectively and force more turnovers. That's how they're going to build their defense. That's what Alex Grinch does, and it complements the offense because if you play with the lead, defensively you want to play fast, get the ball back. If you can steal an extra possession, a half somehow, probably not anybody's going to beat you because it's that, and certainly not in your own conference. The defense last year finished in the top 15 in the country in the negative play rate. The secondary was top 20 versus explosive pass play attempts, and that's pretty impressive because they're doing it in the Big 12. It's not, limiting explosive pass plays in the Big 10 West, no disrespect. It's doing it against people that can throw it well, throw it deep, throw it often. Really, really did a nice job there. So they're improving there. Their quarterback's outstanding. The running back room is deep, despite some new faces. Their offensive skill is so good that it bails them out of games even when they don't play that well. Versus their schedule, they're able to get it done. But it bites them in the keister come playoff time. And this is the rub. We've talked about this before. For Oklahoma to take that next step, yes, the defensive personnel's got to get better, and they've got some. Love their tackles, really like their ends. They're maybe not deep enough, but they've improved their talent. What they have to do is play a smarter overall brand of complementary football. With a lead, run the football. Folks, the best defense is when your defense is on the sidelines resting. They've got to do more of that. It's not about aesthetically pleasing the head coach who's the offensive coordinator that if my offense doesn't score 50 points a game, I'm not doing my job, and therefore, no, you're the head coach. It's about championships, and if you want to go from being really good and being the dominant program in the Big 12 to getting ready to go to the SEC. Might as well get it done now. If you can make the statement this year, and this is the team good enough to do it, that we can play better complementary ball, better 4-minute offense, then you can make a statement in the playoffs this year. You can send a statement that, hey, look out, SEC. We're going to go right somewhere behind Alabama, somewhere behind Georgia, ahead of Georgia, wherever. We're in that probably top 3, top 4 range already, day one in the SEC. But the defense has to be complemented by a good 4-minute offense, just not a 2-minute offense, which I think they have focused a little bit more on that. They can win against their schedule very easily. I think they'll go 12-0. I do think Iowa State's very good. I think there are a couple of trick-up games. But if this team plays smart football, look, they're built with a counter-trade, offense, and they can work that run game effectively and become a more balanced team. Defensively, they're going to do a lot of stunts, a lot of twists. I mentioned, I think Winfrey's one of the best players in the country, and I like their ends. So I think this is a really good team. I think really good. I think like 12-0 good, go to the playoffs good, and then we'll talk later.
Yeah, I mean, and just in terms of the current incarnation of it, I mean, there's a lot of people who do believe in this 2021 OU team for the reasons he mentioned defensively. I mean, Perrion Winfrey, somebody that a lot of people really believe could be a very good standout player for them on that defensive line there. And then also, too, Bonito, the outside linebacker that they have, is somebody I know a lot of people in Norman are very excited about. In the secondary, you get both safeties back in Valerian Turner Yell as a senior there, and then your free safety, Pat Fields, also another player that a lot of people are very excited about. And that's been the thing, Chris, we've seen the last few years, and the 4 times that Lincoln Riley has taken his team to the college football playoff is, let's just take, for example, the game that I think probably still sits with OU fans the most is the Rose Bowl against Georgia. And they had Georgia dead to rights in that game, down 17 at the half. Georgia started to do 2 things very well in the second half. They started to control the line of scrimmage. They got to Baker Mayfield, and they started to get Chubb and Michelle going. And once they were able to do that, it was kind of all she wrote for Oklahoma. Aside from a near disaster for Georgia of Sony Michel fumbling the football, OU almost gets out of there with a win. And I think a lot of people looking at it after that game and saying, gosh, that has got to be something. Kind of like what I talked about earlier in the week, that Chuck Oliver, when he talked with Manny Diaz at ACC kickoff, Manny Diaz said, yeah, we want to get after the quarterback, but we got to eat our vegetables first. And eating our vegetables is stopping the run. Unfortunately for them in the Big 12, they're not asked to do that a ton. There are some teams that do challenge them in that, but not a ton. You want me to give you good news?
Yeah.
Very first game of the year, that's what they're going to be doing. Very first game of the year, they're going to be taking on Willie Fritz and that triple option offense, or I guess not necessarily triple option, but you get my point. That option offense at Tulane, that's going to be a test because you're talking about a game right there on campus in Uptown New Orleans where it's going to be Labor Day weekend, hot as can be. You're going to have to find out how well conditioned you are. And also, too, you're going to be playing against an offense that once you have that game, you don't even really need to watch the film from that game because we're not playing this for the rest of the season. So I guess we can see for individual performances, who played well, who graded out well, all that kind of stuff. But aside from that, they're not going to need it the rest of the way. But they've got good players on the defensive side of the ball. Offensively, we don't necessarily even need to talk about it because we know what Lincoln Riley is. And we know what this program is. That's the key for them is defensively. They've got to be able to show they belong with the programs that you mentioned. How was Clemson able to get things going in their right direction as a program years ago? Controlling the line of scrimmage and having dominant play up there on the line of scrimmage. That's something that Oklahoma eventually can get because they have players in that area of the country. They have players that they can get to Norman, Oklahoma. You just got to be able to show people you can do it. And then soon enough, you have the Brian Brzezis and everybody else around the country saying, ooh, that looks fun. I want to be a part of that.
Yeah, no, listen, but you've got to be able to make sure that the defense is a big part of what you do. And look, play to that too a little bit. As I said, play good 4-minute offense because if you don't do that and defense is an afterthought, well, then it's going to be more and more difficult to recruit those type of players. And look, they've got a great history of recruiting defensive players. Oklahoma recruits Texas like they're in Texas. I mean, they're like, you could say they're not in Norman, Oklahoma. They're in Dallas, Texas. I mean, they're just
Dallas Fort Worth is basically, they're a suburb of Dallas Fort Worth.
They absolutely just like a Texas based. It's what they are. I don't think there's any doubt that this program has all sorts of potential, all sorts of ability. And I think certainly if you look at the people that have given them trouble, Kansas State, run the football, shorten the game. You know, all of a sudden you don't get as many possessions. Iowa State gives them trouble. Why? You know, they control the game. Iowa State is the anti-Big 12 team. Everybody's spreading it out, throwing it. Iowa State says, we're going to run 2 tight ends. We're going to keep the ball away from you. And that's how they've done it. They've created their identity. So that's what you have to face. When you get into the playoffs, you can, at Oklahoma, still beat most of the time Kansas State. You can still beat most of the time Iowa State because you got better players. But when you play a style that somebody's going to punch you in the mouth and are going to maybe reduce your possessions by maybe 2.5, you don't get as many shots at the basket. You don't perform as well in the playoffs. So I've always said, Oklahoma, your motto should be Clemson. Your motto is, yeah, we can be good on offense, but we can play better complementary ball, and we can recruit elite defensive players that can do every bit what Clemson's doing. They just haven't done it quite as well. I think they're progressing that way. Now, as they're progressing that way, they're no longer going to be in the league that they can do the Clemson thing where they can develop their team throughout the year. They're going to have to get ready for get punched in the mouth week in and week out in the SEC. And I think they're one of the teams that are built in a way that they can handle it well like the upper tier teams, but it's going to be the challenge. You mentioned quickly the Rose Bowl game. As a sidebar to that, I thought 2 things jumped out at me coaching-wise in that game. One, it was an unbelievable offensive game plan schematically for Lincoln Riley and his offensive staff in that first half against Georgia. The second half, the halftime adjustments by Georgia defensively was probably the best job done maybe in the past 6 or 8 years in college football. So the whole Kirby Smart, not a good game day coach, you know, a lot of that is just if you lose a close game, well, you're bad on game day. Oh, you went for it on 4th down, it didn't work. That halftime adjustment was one of the best. They had no answers for Oklahoma. Oklahoma put some different packages in that they weren't prepared for, and they figured it out in halftime, and they did get some stops on defense. And then you mentioned they just ran the football right down Oklahoma, and Oklahoma couldn't stop them. And yeah, it could have gone either way, but that game was completely over at the half until Georgia's coaches figured it out and got that game. So that was one of the great technically pleasing games to watch. Both coaching staffs do a good job, but in game, which is the tougher thing to adjust to, the Georgia staff doesn't get enough credit for what they did in that game and pulling out. That's one of the best coaching jobs I've seen in a long, long time.
Well, Rodney Anderson was the key for them in that game. They were able to get him going in the first half, and that was the thing that Georgia, I think, really said in the second half. Is they said, stop the run. We stopped the run. We have got them in a position that we want them to be in. And that's the thing, too, is to Oklahoma's credit, there's a reason why they're in the college football playoff, Chris. It's not that you had Baker Mayfield at the time, and now you have Spencer Rattler, and in between there you had Kyler Murray just airing it out. Yeah, that was a huge part of it. That's what it was predicated on. They also really pride themselves on being able to run the football. And that's been the thing that have they been able to control the line of scrimmage in that game right there. And then the following year against Alabama, not necessarily. The following year against LSU, which, by the way, in that year, one of the examples that you brought up there in terms of facing the slow it down too tight and run it at you type of offense. Remember that Baylor game they almost lost in Waco? That's exactly what it was. They won that game because they had better players, but that's exactly what Matt Rule and them were able to do. They were able to get them in the half-court offense here, to use a basketball reference. But no, these are things that definitely going to need to be something that Oklahoma, at least in terms of their strengths offensively, only strengthen them even more And then also, too, being able to just continue to build up on the offensive and defensive lines, which we've seen that they can do in Norman. They were the Joe Moore Award winner in that 2017 season. So they can get offensive linemen there to play for the Sooners. There's no doubt about it. So I would say, and also, too, kind of to take a conversation me and you had off the air onto the air as we were doing these breakdowns and how would Texas know you fit into the SEC as currently constructed. People can look at Texas A&M, for example, and say, why were they able to, at least at the beginning, have success in the SEC? And you have Johnny Manziel and everybody going to Alabama, winning in 2012. Chris, look at the offensive linemen they had. I mean, Cedric Abway. You had Jake Matthews. I mean, you had, just other names that I'm forgetting about right now just on the spot. But you had good offensive linemen, and you had a couple of good defensive linemen. Now, the numbers weren't great in terms of depth, but at least you had good players there, and that's a start when you get into the SEC.
Yeah, and if you look at the teams that have given Nick some problems, it's either a great quarterback or a quarterback that plays great. And Manziel played great. I mean, he was pulling things out of the hat, and it was Johnny football at its highest. And they played well around him. And, the Kevin Sumlin, derailing just unraveled with recruiting and whatnot. But he had an offense that was pretty good. And they won some shootout games, no doubt. And they did a good job in that. That's been transformed. So, yeah, there's no question. I think that, Oklahoma will do fine. They're in a better position. They got a better football team, a better football program. And it's going to be interesting to see how they go. Now, I'm sure we'll get into Texas, and we can a lot of Texas appears to be the most polarizing discussion of them all.
Well, that's usually by their own making. By the way, too, for more news and notes around the SEC, college football on a nationwide scale, NFL, even the draft when that comes around next spring, recruiting happening all the time. Always remember to head on over to LandryFootball.com and check out everything that Chris and his great team have going over there. And you led right into it, Chris, because, it is usually Texas by their own doing in terms of showing you how great they are, at least telling you how great they are. Well, let's find out how great they really are as currently constructed as they eventually find themselves in the same league with Oklahoma, both eventually getting over to the SEC. What does Steve Sarkisian's program look like right now?
I think this football team is better than their football program. What does that really mean? I don't think he's inheriting a bad team. And we'll get into it in a little bit. But I think Sark's going to do a good job coaching this team. He's going to run the offense. I think I mentioned in the breakdown in the Big 12 show this week, I broke down extensively Oklahoma and Texas. Pete Kawakowski is a great hire, and he'll run the defense. The issue with them is how well will Sark do with the presence to keep the focus and the attention to details on point. It's a very distracting type of job with a lot of different things. I think the best thing that's going to happen to Sark is going into the SEC and he doesn't have to deal with the Longhorn Network, where he's got to do Mac would be doing interviews during practice on the Longhorn. I mean, it was a clown show. I mean, it was like Jerry Jones was running it with the guys. Just, unbelievable. That's the thing. Is Sark going to be he's not the ideal personality, the strong guy. How is he going to blend in and handle that? He'll blend in well. How will he handle in terms of presence to keep the distraction away and get a little bit more of a workmanlike focus into that program? Because I got to tell you, a couple of things. Sark did a really good job with the University of Washington program. And people say, the record. No. He inherited a bad program and won 9-23 before he got there, and he turned it around. The personal problems that he had obviously derailed him at USC. Hope and pray, as I've never been a part of that, had anyone in my family that has. I'm always told that you never you're always fighting alcoholism, and hopefully that's behind him. It's different when you are Nick Saban is running the program and you can concentrate on doing what you do best, and that's putting together an offense and play calling. He is outstanding at that. He and Lane are just brilliant at that, both guys that were in that USC tree. But there are even more distractions at Texas than there were at USC. So let's hope that personally he can stay to where it doesn't cause him to be almost on the end of a nervous breakdown dealing with some of the issues that you got to deal with at Texas. He's inheriting a top 20, top 25 team. Now, I know people will laugh and say, well, that's Texas. You should be top 5. And look, they're a top 25 team. I mean, I looked at them. I studied. I said, do I have them high to look? They got maybe the best running back in the country. They certainly is on the short list. He could be his Najee Harris. It's one of the best offensive lines in the country. The defensive line is thin. But, boy, I tell you, they've got some talent. Offensively, last year, different this year, but just looking at, they protected the football better than anybody in the Big 12 last year. And top 5 nationally. And defensively, it led the Big 12 and top nationally in limiting explosive plays. Again, in an offense where you get a lot of explosive plays. They were second behind TCU in stopping plays behind the line of scrimmage. P. John Robinson, if you don't know who he is, you will find out quickly. I love Pete Kwiatkowski is outstanding. He's been at Washington for years. He and Jimmy Lake are very, very close. Pete turned down his alma mater, Boise State, to get the head coaching job. So Andy Avalos left Oregon to take that job. Pete, working with Jimmy Lake very close, but he decided to leave to go to Texas, and he's going to be the guy that's going to run the defense while Sark runs the offense. So it's a better situation for him so he can step out, so to speak, out of the shadow. Not that Jimmy is a large shadow, but it's always difficult when you're working for the guy that's running that side of the ball. Look, I think that he is the best I've seen, one of the best I've seen, one of the best I've seen at teaching defensive backs and teaching coverages. I would put him in, it's one of the reasons, because Saban and I have talked about it a bunch. We talked about, Saban wanted to hire Jimmy Lake a couple of years ago. And this was when Jimmy was working for Chris Peterson. And we figured out later that Pete obviously was telling the whole folks behind the scenes, we didn't know it at the time, that he was just going to coach one more year and Jimmy was going to be promoted. We think that's why he turned down Nick, offer to go to Alabama. But Pete, Jimmy, if you look at how they've worked and developed secondaries, they've had like 21 guys drafted. And we're not talking about DBU's LSU, DBU's Florida. We're talking about good players that they develop into pro players. They do a phenomenal job, and pattern matching, staying in phase, they do a tremendous job. They do a good job matching up their fronts and coverage as well. I think Sark's got him a great, not a good, a great defensive coordinator. I think they'll be outstanding. And I think that the issue with them is, look, we can make fun of, the quote-unquote the tea-sippers and, how they do it and all that kind of stuff and the braggadocious part. That's all true. That's all fair. I would say the folks that just say, oh, they're an awful program, they're not any good, probably are just assuming things and are not really studying film, that this is not a bad team. Now, as you get into the rung of the SEC, they're not as good as Oklahoma. Now, let's start there. Certainly not as good as Alabama. They're not as good as A&M right now. LSU has more talent. Georgia certainly has more talent. I think Florida has more talent. So and I think we can go down, but there's some drop-offs in the SEC too. You could put them in right there with the Auburns of the world. The Ole Misses and they can. There's no reason why, and I'm seeing it initially already in recruiting. They did a good job of recruiting. I think they will do a better job. And I think they'll do a good job coaching. I think if you look at the team, that it's a little bit surprising in some ways that they gave up, because I don't think they did a bad job. I think you can make the case that maybe Tom wasn't the fit or wasn't as mature, some of those issues, and I think they probably got them. But I think they're in better shape to be turned around. If it were in the Big 12, you'd feel a lot better about it. But in the SEC, it's going to be tougher. But they're going to be able to sell the SEC in recruiting now. They're going to be able to get – the program will be better once it goes into the SEC. Better, maybe not better record, because it's going to be more to climb. It's kind of like in a golf tournament. You know, you could be second and 8 shots behind, and, you know, guy makes a couple of double bogeys, you're right in it. But when you got to climb over 8 people to the lead, that's when it's going to be tough, because everybody's got to shoot their way out of it, right? Well, now you're going into where there's a big leaderboard in the SEC, and it's going to be a tough climb. But I think the program's going to get better, and we'll see where it goes, and we'll see if Sark's the answer. But you look at him and study him, I don't think they're as disheveled or as bad as a football team as they are. They may be every bit as dysfunctional as we think they are behind the scenes, and that may get in the way of the football team, maybe. I don't think they're a bad football team at all. I think they're a top 20, 25 football team, and I'm curious to see what they do this year right off the bat.
Well, a couple of things with that, too, is the long and short of it with what has been the problem for Texas the last few years is I think it started back in 2010, I believe is when it was, when Mac Brown, we're going to go I formation. We're going to do all these things. We're going to get more physical up front because that's what they're doing in Alabama, so it's going to work for us. He didn't have the players. He couldn't do it. So you were trying to put a offensive system on a quarterback, Garrett Gilbert, who had come there and probably, if not privately, to other people said, this isn't what I was brought here to do. I wasn't brought here to do this. You brought me in here to do what that McCoy guy was doing and what we'd been doing offensively before this, to be able to take what we were doing and take it even further. That was one problem. I think the other problem as well, Chris, is it hasn't necessarily been that they haven't recruited well. They've recruited well enough. They weren't at the level that Mac Brown was, because I'll go ahead and say it right now. Probably if you had Earl Thomas, Sergio Kendall, all of the Griffin brothers, all of the players who had come through Texas during that magical run in the mid to late 2000s, a lot of those guys probably now are thinking twice. If the current landscape, again, if you have Nick Saban doing what he's doing in Tuscaloosa, you have Ed doing what he's doing in Baton Rouge, Kirby doing what he's doing in Athens. I'm just saying that the options are there. I think for them at the time, they looked in the state and said the options aren't there in College Station at Kyle Field. Do I really want to go kind of take myself to a lower level than I think I probably should be at a TCU or a Texas Tech? No. Do I want to go out to California? Could. And the SEC at the time, they were able to do what they were doing by dipping into Texas, but they weren't what they are right now. And I think the overarching issue with Texas has been the last few years, Chris, they play bad football at times. Really bad football. I mean, you had last year, I believe, was it Keontae Ingram against TCU trying to reach the ball over the goal line.
Yep.
Swatted away. TCU lands on the football and wins the football game. And you're just kind of thinking to yourself, right there, you're just like, gosh, that is just such situational unawareness. It is unbelievable if I'm a Texas fan watching that. You're just so frustrated seeing that. The near meltdown against Kyler Murray in Oklahoma a couple of years ago in Dallas, where, I mean, it was kind of the thing that you looked at with Tom Herman and you looked at with Todd Orlando and everybody that was there, of just kind of as a Texas fan, you're just like, how is this not working? You've got the players. How is it not working? So I think that's a lot of frustration that has come out of Austin. But, you know, the other part of it as well is you talked about Bijan Robinson, and rightfully so. We saw what he could do last year in the Alamo Bowl against Colorado. Don't sleep on Roschon Johnson either.
No, He's really good. The sophomore is really good. He's a big back. There's no question. He's outstanding. They've got a good room. They've got an outstanding room. There's no doubt about that.
And as you mentioned, Najee Harris, I mean, that's something that in these offensive successful systems right now, the running back is crucial to you. 4 returning starters on the offensive line. You got to replace your center, which, again, like I said last episode, that's not easier said than done. The center is the key to how good your offensive line is. So that's going to be a key for them.
Yeah, I like Kerstetter, though. I think he's really good. I think the biggest issue is going to be the quarterback. I mean, it's going to be a young guy. I think it's going to be Card. I mean, we'll see how that plays out. That's going to be pivotal, and I think they're going to lean on the run. I think that's what Sark's going to do to bring the young quarterback on, and that's obviously one of the big differences is, Oklahoma's got Spencer Rattler. We didn't even really talk a whole lot about Spencer. He's just so good. He's and the weapons are so good, and that's a huge difference. And so that's Sark's job. That's what he said. I got to fix this offense. I've got to develop the quarterbacks. I've got to recruit them, and they're doing all those things well. And I think it'll take a little time. And I agree with you. I think that if you go back, one of the things when I go into Texas, I always felt like, see, recruiting is misunderstood. I think that, there's thought whatever. If you're at a big time program, you can recruit easy because it's maybe easier to sell the program. The thing that people miss is, are you offering the right kids? Mm-hmm. And I thought under Mac later, I thought they recruited well for a stretch, and then they got, I don't know what it was, and then people will have their theories. I'm not in that building, so I can't say, but some people there on the staff said, I've asked, they said, well, I think we got a little complacent. We got a little bit too carried with, the star ratings and who's this and that. And we recruited a lot of guys that we didn't do enough of what we call football character evaluation. They weren't necessarily bad kids, but they were kids that were a little entitled. They were a little bit full of themselves. So they came in, and that became, boy, Mac just gets rankled when I say this. And I don't know how to say, they were a little bit soft. And I think it kind of led to some of those issues. And then Mac got into it. Mac's the CEO, right? So it's the flavor of the month. Yeah, I'm going to go out and hire the best this. And it's we're going, Manny Diaz is going to do this. And then we're going to do and it just kind of goes here and there. And they lost continuity. And because they weren't doing it well. Look, when you don't have continuity, you change it to try to fix it, right? But when you try to fix it and it doesn't work, then you're constantly changing the message, the scheme, and the style. Yep. And that's the biggest problem. That's the biggest reason why Alabama's had success, because they don't change the message. They don't change the style. They may modify it and tweak it. And Mac just had to go one direction to the other because that's what he was. He was a CEO coach. And while it worked for a stretch, it didn't. And in the end, there've been a little bit of too many people in the pod, and this is my guy, this is my, no one has really had the full support. We'll see if Sark has it. We'll see what Sark does with it. But I do like him as a coach on the offense, Pete on the defensive side. We'll see if they can do a good job running the whole program. But there's no doubt they're going to be able to sell, Dan, to the kids in Texas. Biggest thing now, all these kids want to play in the SEC. I mentioned on our last show that we had earlier this week, that now if you throw in the Texas and Oklahoma recruits with the other SEC recruits, it's like 53% of the top 300 are going to SEC schools or Texas and Oklahoma, which will be SEC schools. I mean, they all want to play in the league. Mm-hmm. So you can. That's what ticks off A&M so much, is because they've had that. You can't go anywhere in the state of Texas and play in the SEC unless you come here.
Right.
And Texas can do that now, and how they capitalize on it's going to be interesting to see.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the quarterbacks, you mentioned Thompson, you mentioned Carr, and that's really the overarching of everything is quarterback play has slouched for them the last few years. I mean, let's be honest here. There was a time that even though he was Colt McCoy's brother, Case McCoy would never get on the field. Now, they had some bad luck with David Ash. I mean, the concussions, everything, that was unfortunate. And then you eventually, soon enough, after you get to Shane Buechele, who had a good game, not necessarily a really great career at quarterback because eventually he ended up at SMU. I mean, good player in his own right. Then you get to Sam Ehlinger. So the whole thing is the quarterback.
And I love Sam. I love Sam Ehlinger.
yeah.
I thought he was a player. But yeah, it's absolutely right. Well, look,
Absolutely.
think about this.
Someday he's got that in him. There's no doubt about it.
Think about this. Until Vince Young came around.
Yeah.
I mean, you hadn't had a big-time program be in a drought for a big-time quarterback. I mean, you can go, James Street was pretty good, but my God, the last really good one was, Bobby Lane?
Maybe.
I mean, really that was a drop. And then, they started to recruit some of those guys that, but even with Sam, it was like Sam, and Sam was carrying them, and, it wasn't quite, 2 years ago, they played LSU pretty well in that first game and didn't quite have enough. But yeah, no, that's going to be Sark's job to be able to handle that part of it. So, look, I look at their schedule this year. Louisiana Lafayette has got one of the top 15 to 18 offensive lines in the country, not group of 5 in the country. Arkansas on the road is going to be even bigger now.
It could be 0-2 to start the season.
Could be, and yet if they start 2-0, they're going to start 4-0, and then they're going to go to TCU, unbeaten, and that in Oklahoma are a really tough stretch. So getting off the good start's important because you're going to end up with 4 losses by the time you leave the field October 9th if you lose those first 2 that we kind of alluded to. I think that they probably win those, and then I think Iowa State on the road's tough, but look. I don't think 9-3 is out of the question for this team. 8-4 may be more realistic. We'll see. Those are just numbers, but I am curious to see and watch how they develop through the course of the year. Everyone's going to be doing that in the SEC because everyone's going to be looking at it. And the brand of Texas is big. When they care just as much or care more about making fun of you when you're not good, it is when you're good. Because, I say this, no disrespect. Nobody says, man, that Texas El Paso sucks. Nobody cares,
right?
But with Texas, hell, they want to talk. That. So I think that tells you right there that the meter, the brand meter is pretty high with the Horns. There's no doubt. That's not any denying that. How good they're going to be, Dan, we'll find out. But it's going to be real interesting to see what Sark can do and how he's able to handle the big picture stuff that's going to be so pivotal to whether he's successful or not.
I think the ultimate for them is going to be, really, like you just said right there, the development. That's going to be huge for them. And I know it's easier to say, don't worry about the wins and the losses, all of that kind of stuff, because you still are going to have social media be social media if they lose to Louisiana or if they go to Arkansas and lose to the Razorbacks. So I thought Texas was back, all this kind of stuff, which, look, to Sarkisian's credit, he's been basically saying, no, we got to build this program. We've got to be able to live up to the all gas, no brakes, everything you've heard out of that program, because let's also let the listeners in on something too, Chris, that if you have anybody that's a Pete Carroll disciple, they're going to sound like Pete Carroll. Ed in Baton Rouge, Ogeron, he sounds like Pete Carroll in his.
Now, Ed, I would say that Ed has just got his own dialect, but I know what you're saying.
Yeah,
not how they say it, how they sound when they say it, but what they say. I got you.
The Tell the Truth Mondays, the competition Thursdays, all that kind of stuff. Trust me,
that's exactly right.
In Atlanta, we lived through it with Dan Quinn. So, but no, look, to wrap this up about Texas, just really easily as can be said, it's good when Texas is good. And we want to have, like I said about USC earlier, Texas is one of those brands. When they're great and they're hated and all these different types of things, you want to see them lose. It's great for football. Alabama, people want to see that. That's where you want to be. You want to be kind of like what you just said right there, too, where people make fun of them. It's like an entertainment. You want people to have an opinion of you. Howard Stern years ago. Why do people who hate him listen? Because they want to see they want to hear what he's going to say next. For Texas, gosh, I hate Texas. Why are you watching them? Well, I want to see if they can win this game.
Yeah, no, that's right. And I was just thinking last night, when you look at schedules, and I have a little highlight thing I do weekly in the schedules, and I make my chart because I monitor 6 games at a time, and it's so often that you have just more SEC games that are like the bigger games. So I watch 6 at a time and monitor them. They're all being taped. And then other, like I've got like 2 other games on each TV being taped for later viewing, but there's more of, and I'm thinking, my goodness, think of the games now when we get Texas and Oklahoma in the league, the extra games in addition to what we have. So I'm just thinking about ESPN. So when they get the deal, so I don't know if their feature game is going to be the 2:30 game or it's going to be not. It won't matter. It'll be like they'll have a both probably. They'll have the 2:30, they'll have a night, and they'll have a like. The third and fourth game in that league is in the SEC is going to be better than most best games of the year in other leagues. I mean, just the simple. I know Texas and Arkansas are not that good now, but and we're not talking about either one of those teams in the playoff. But Texas, Arkansas, it seemed like not yesterday, but I can remember vividly the '69 game. The game of the century and President Nixon going there. I mean, it's a long ways away from that old Southwest Conference states, but you throw in that, you throw in an Oklahoma A&M, you throw any combination of Oklahoma against Oklahoma, Florida, I mean, you throw Jordan, whoever they play. My goodness, you start to get a feel for why the television and the ratings, what it's going to mean. It's just these 2 teams are going to be big-time draws as we watch and see them ascend, decline, whatever. But just like we see, Florida struggle and get back, Georgia be at get back really good. LSU go up and down. Alabama have their issues at times, but now they've been great for a long time under Nick. Auburn's up and down. Arkansas's trying to get back. Tennessee's in the doldrums trying to figure it out. But all of those are big ticket items and big ticket brands where they care a whole bunch. And Texas is a little different. They're a little bit more like uppity. They're not like the A&M. They're a little bit more. They're not down home, but they like to brag a lot and tell you how great they are, as you mentioned. And even when they're not.
Yeah. There's a fit in the SEC with their fan base. There is, because when they care, they care. And I know that a lot of people say, oh, so they're front runners. Well, to a point, I think that there is that element in their fan base. But like I said, I mean, there was no better place in college football from about 2005 to 2009 to watch a football game for a meaningful game than Darrell K. Royal Memorial Stadium in Austin. I mean, that place was awesome to be at for when, Ohio State came through one year. I mean,
yes.
You had... I believe did USC come through one year? I'm trying to remember, but they had some.
I don't remember. But
the revenge against Texas Tech in 2009. I mean, just all of those games. There was a time again where Mac Brown had that program going, and that's what Steve Sarkisian and the leadership in Austin are trying to do as they soon enough get towards the SEC. Speaking of the SEC, remind you that you can get this show right here, SEC Football and Beyond, when you subscribe to the Landry Football Podcast channel on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. That is where you can find us right here on SEC Football and Beyond. Real quick, Chris, because the conversation that we had on both Texas and Oklahoma went a little long, so let's just go through these really quick. In the SEC, a few quarterback competitions that are going to be really interesting to pay attention to, and even a couple of nationally that we're going to look into. Tennessee, what does Josh Heupel have in front of him in his very first fall camp?
Well, there's a lot of talk about Joe Milton, the Michigan transfer. He's got a very live arm, but he's not real accurate, and I've got some concerns about that, being able to run that offense unless he's improved his consistency and his touch. I have real concerns about it, but they can work him in the run game a little bit. I think that's wide open still. I think that's one to be won, and I wouldn't count Hendon Hooker out, but I think that they've got to figure that out here in these next few weeks.
Texas A&M, what is Jimbo looking at?
Yeah, I think it's Hayden King. I mean, Zach Gazalda's got a big-time arm, but he's too raw at this point. Stowers is not ready. I think Haynes King is the best option for Jimbo because he has a better feel for their offense, and Jimbo can use them in the run game. Jimbo, first and foremost, is a run game guy and protecting the football. I think King can do that a little bit better. He's a dual-threat type of quarterback, and I think he's the best, maybe the best option for them right now versus top-tier SEC opponents. That said, if Zach can, develop, he certainly could give them a little bit more in the passing game. But you better protect the football and make good decisions for Jimbo, or you're not playing quarterback, I can tell you.
And LSU now with Miles Brennan out. We have got Max Johnson. We've got Garrett Dellinger. What is Jake Peetz and the offensive staff going to be looking at in their first fall camp working with these quarterbacks?
Well, it's Max. And, look, I think Max was going to get the job anyway, probably beat out Miles. But, having the security of a guy like Miles, we went over that. That's tough. Garrett Nussmeier's not ready. He struggled in the spring. And he's young. I'm not saying he struggled in the old boy, but, the game, you could see him, trouble processing, and he's just not ready. They don't have another option on that. They got Matt O'Dowd, who's running the third-team offense, will run the third-team offense. For Nussmeier's decision-making and getting him ready, this is Max Johnson's job. Now it's just about, getting the backup ready to go and getting Nussmeier's, comfortable with decision-making. He's got talent. He's got leadership skills, but he doesn't know it yet. Now, Max is still young in his own right. I think they can run some RPOs with him. I think, he's got some ability to work outside the pocket. I think they'll move the pocket with him a little bit. I thought he played very well. I thought he played very well in a couple of key big games for him. But, this is still, to me, going to be about that offensive line, which is still pretty good, and running the football. That's where it's going to have to really make its hay. I do think in Butte, and they've got some other good receivers that are really fast. I think Max can be very efficient. Just the issue is if he gets hurt, then it's, I think, a very, very precipitous situation for them, a precipitous drop perhaps for them.
Nationally, the beyond portion of the quarterback competitions in college football. Ohio State, Ryan Day saying earlier in the week that they are going to need, quote, all of them in terms of the quarterbacks that they have in their room. Now, you got a reclassified quarterback in Quinn Ewers, who has probably just now gotten to Columbus. So you got to believe he's got a long way to go. But you got a lot of people, even for preseason all Big Ten teams, saying that C.J. Stroud is going to be somebody to watch. What is that quarterback situation in Columbus, Ohio looking like?
I'd be very surprised if it's not C.J. Stroud. He's the clear favorite. I think I can read through Ryan Day's comment. What do they do? The little thing where they put the bubble where you got what he says and what he's thinking. He's thinking, none of you SOBs better transfer because I'm going to say that we need all of you. Because I think that's what. In fact, I was talking with a couple of LSU staffers, and we were talking about Jack Miller and stuff. I think Jack Miller is I would think that one of those guys is transferring, Miller and McCord. But, I think it's CJ's job. But there again, just like we just talked about with LSU, you don't want these guys because one guy gets injured, another transferred, and you got one guy, and Quinn Ewers ain't ready to do anything right now but make some NIL money. So I think it's Stroud. I think that they're dynamic at running back. They are loaded at receiver. I think CJ's going to be fine. And look at what they did. There was a lot of question marks about Justin Fields when he went over there. And not so much once he got there. And, I'm not saying CJ's going to be Justin Fields early. I think this guy's going to be really good. I think he's the guy. I think that's where it's going to go.
All right, let's go to one final note in this one in the NFL and in college before we get to a couple of mailbag questions to get us out of here on this Friday edition of SEC Football and Beyond. And Chris, this news I think will be pretty interesting, and that is Robert Griffin III, former Heisman Trophy winner, joining ESPN as an NFL college football analyst, but also part of his deal with the four-letter network. Still an out if he gets an opportunity to play. We see injuries happen all the time in the NFL, especially, the quarterback position, willing to give players who you think are out of the game, but still an opportunity to come back. And we're looking at the situation in Indianapolis right now with the Colts. So I can see why Robert Griffin III wants to throw that out there. But from everybody I've talked with in terms of his chance to be a really good analyst, they believe he's going to be outstanding.
That's great. I'm happy for him. That's what he wants to do. I haven't really, other than maybe seeing him in interviews, I don't know that I have any idea how good he'll be as an analyst. So that'll be good. I'm curious to see. I know that the Ravens situation was the best fit for him in terms of a backup because he could run that offense pretty seamlessly. I would think Philadelphia, because I don't think there's any real legs to being able to trade for Deshaun Watson at this stage anyway.
What about San Francisco if Jimmy G starts to struggle?
I don't see him fitting that offense. I mean, you may say, well, Kyle Shanahan changed. Yeah, he ran a different offense. I think that they want to get Trey Lance ready to go. I mean, I think that he could run parts of it, but I don't know that that's as good a fit, even though it was they drafted, he and his dad drafted RG3 and built an offense for RG3. That's not the offense that they're running in San Francisco. So I don't see that as good of a fit. But if he goes down, a veteran I put it past Kyle to be able to, hey, look, we're going to run the football anywhere. We're going to do a lot of that and run a lot of G power and let him roll out, run some boots. And yeah, I think he could do some of that. I wonder, I think it depends upon how much Trey Lance has developed in, if Jimmy G gets injured, where is Trey at that point? I think that might determine. So yeah, we'll see if there's an opportunity out there for him. We've seen a couple guys do that, go out and get. I'm thinking Chris Carter was doing some TV somewhere when the Dolphins brought him in on his final and last stop. It's happened a couple of times. Interesting though. Hey, by the way, I have to tell you. So as we're doing the show, I was looking at the text, and this is for our Georgia fans that may want to know. We're playing a little phone tag with a good friend Rod Carey, who's the head coach at Temple, and I was answering a couple of questions. So D'Wan Mathis is over there, and they really like him. And I put a little note that I'll put in my notebook on LandryFootball.com. But I just wanted to pass that along since see we forget about certain guys where they go. Yeah, D'Wan over there, they like him, the big guy. They think he can help them over there. So good luck to him as he tries to start his career there.
All right, as we get to the, excuse me, there, getting a little choked up thinking about the throwback.
Just thinking about the throwback. Yeah, through the D'Wan Mathis. Oh, man. Throwbacks to what happened in Georgia. I got you.
No, absolutely. As we're getting closer to football season, I'm just that excited about it. But anyway, let's get to the mailbag as we've run a little long here today, so we'll try to get you out of here as quickly as possible. Let's see. Woodshed King. We love the Woodshed King. He always loves to weigh in, and he asks a question for you. So I will cede the floor to you, Chris Landry. Do you think that Max Johnson would have been the starter at LSU, even if Brennan were healthy?
I do. Yes, I absolutely do. We'll never know. I think the only issue was going to be is could Max Johnson protect the football, make good decisions. We saw him do some of that last year, as I mentioned. So I would suspect that, he would have progressed enough to win the job. He has more playmaking ability than Miles. But the big key is it's not, again, I stress again, it's not what he would have wanted or not. It's that you don't have another option right now to go to if Max struggles, if he gets a little confused, if he starts turning the football over, or, God forbid, if he gets hurt. If any of those things take place, then you're dealing with a guy that's even further behind in being able to see the field and knowing where to go with the football. So it's a tough situation because, again, now it's more about who's your starting quarterback if your starter goes down, because that's the way you got to look at it from a coaching standpoint. So my mind always goes to that.
Real quick, Chris, something that, is to kind of build off that, but on the defensive side of the ball, Durante Jones, I know a lot of people feeling good about what he can do this year as a defensive coordinator. Can you necessarily be able to fix the problems that ailed them last year over one offseason?
Well, you can fix some of it. I think the communication part, the poor communication of what really happened last year defensively for LSU was Bo came in, and as I said, you can't have the message completely changed. It did. We're going to run my defense. We're going to do it this way. Your guys that were part of what you did in the 30 front stuff last year, you're no longer a factor. So then you've got guys that are not really engaged in the process. Then we're going to call it different. Then you've got confusing. But then you've got issues when you have guys lining up and they're like the palms up, like, what the bleep is the call, what, and then you can't communicate it. Then you can't really do a whole lot. When you got Derek Stingley, who's a great talent, is running in the wrong direction, like it's a fire drill, it's problematic. I think what you can do is just the overall, we're going to not quote unquote simplify, because they ran simple stuff. They didn't run a complicated defense, but they tried to change the terminology, tried to do everything. Well, all of a sudden, it's like a different language. It's kind of like, well, we're calling this and that, and your mind goes back to what you used to call it, and all of a sudden, you're now in the wrong coverage. You don't communicate. Guys run free. You didn't put in a whole lot to adjust to, and so you didn't put a whole lot into zone and a lot of pattern match. So you're going to run press man. So all of a sudden you're going to let all these crossers run against Mississippi State. You have no way to adjust. You haven't prepared to adjust. It's not that you're too stubborn to do it. You just didn't do a good job of preparing them. And if you're not prepared, then you can't really use something you're not prepared, because that's even worse. So all of that was, to me, a big disaster. And I think that Durante can simplify it, communicate better. It's not like strategically they're going to be like tremendously different or do anything exotic, or they're going to try to bring pressure. They're going to play a lot of man, but I think they're going to play a little more zone when they need to and be better prepared to do it. And I think they're just going to communicate it a little bit better, a little bit more seamlessly. So I don't think you're going to have as many breakdowns, but I also think they're not as deep on the defensive line as they have been historically. They're pretty good. They're just not as deep, not as dominant. So it limits some of the things that they want to do, because all they've done in their great heyday of defensive years is they let the defensive front eat, and those secondary guys and say, we'll come and we'll play you man-to-man defense and we'll win. And particularly with pressure, we're really going to win. Now you've got to be able to modify it some. You've got to be able to pattern match some. You've got to be able to switch off some. And if you don't have that seamless transition, you got all sorts of blown coverages and people like, Missouri coming down on you and Mississippi State disaster, and everybody really having their chances to go out and attack you.
Yeah, I mean, the best advice I think anybody could ever give in either coaching or playing football, Chris, is just football. Don't overthink it. Just play it. I mean, I remember I had a coach years ago who said that. It's just football. Don't overthink it. Just play it. And that's the advice you can give.
Yeah, you got to play fast, and play fast doesn't mean speed. You got to play fast. You can't think. You've got to react. You've got to know it so that you can react situationally there. If you're thinking about, okay, it's too late. Ball's not, particularly against all the tempo. So you got to be prepared. And confidence comes with preparation, and preparation comes with communication. And that was the trifecta breakdown in last year's defense. I would think it would be better. How much better? I don't know. What does that mean in the win-loss column? I don't know that, I kind of broke them down. I looked at them and said, there's probably could be, a 9, 10. I think there's talent-wise, there's probably 10 or 11 wins there. I think they're probably more like a 9-3 type team, though. We'll see. And obviously, that's one thing to say at the beginning of the year. Let's see how these teams progress, because in the week 3 and week 4, injuries will make a team look a lot different than they are right now.
Well, we have it all to look forward to as fall camps get going. On Friday morning, when you listen to this podcast, you're going to be saying to yourself, "Ooh, we're already here." So that's the excitement that we have. He's Chris Landry. I'm Dan Matthews. Chris, always great to catch up with you. Hey, what do you say we do this again beginning of next week as we react to some of the news and notes from fall camp from over the weekend and get people even closer to the football season?
Let's do it. I look forward to it. And join us twice a week, folks. We're going to be here all the time, and we're going to love it with you.
SEC football and beyond. Again, you can find us on Apple, Spotify, wherever you download your podcasts. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We always appreciate you all listening. So once again, for me, Dan Matthews, he's Chris Landry. Thank you all for listening. Talk to you next week.